This lesson is about MKUltra. We have a few slides, and then we're going to watch a documentary that was actually aired in the late 1970s, after the program was kind of brought to light via a FOIA request. So I haven't watched it yet, but it'll be interesting to see what they say about it. It was run by like ABC back in the day, so it's kind of retro looking, but we're going to go through some slides around what the project was, what some of the sub-projects and the actual experiments entailed, and if you're squeamish at all, you might want to brace yourself because some of this stuff is quite grotesque. Let me go ahead and share my slides. Okay. So, just to kind of frame up how this was even born and came to be, during the Cold War era, Um, intelligence agencies in both the Eastern and Western blocs set up secret experiments to devise methods of mind control and brainwashing in order to gain an advantage over the enemy, or at least a perceived advantage. The most notorious of these endeavors was the Central Intelligence Agency's, or CIA's, illegal MKUltra program, emphasis on illegal. Also, after we go through all this, I think it's impossible to not have very, very strong questions in the front of your mind around what other illegal activities the CIA has been up to since then, because clearly they're not going to stop. Like, just because one project is exposed and gets some bad PR doesn't mean don't have 10 others going on simultaneously in the background. And so I think that really needs to be at the forefront of our minds, just being vigilant around what is actually going on right now, and how we might be affected. But so MKUltra ran from 1953 to 1973, so for 20 years. In its quest for a truth serum, ultimately, that could be employed to force confessions from subjects were not cooperating, and also the desire to be able to manipulate people's behavior, the CIA experimented on thousands of subjects. Most of them were unwitting, not providing consent, and often with disastrous health consequences for those who were a part of this as a result. Um, so some of the details here. Alan Dulles, the Fabian, who we've definitely mentioned quite a few times leading up to this, was involved. Surprise, surprise. So he's the one who authorized this clandestine program in 1953. And in a speech delivered the same year at Princeton University, shocker, at the National Alumni Conference, Dulles remarked about understanding the alleged Soviet mind control techniques. Quote, he said, "We in the West are somewhat handicapped in getting all the details. We have no human guinea pigs ourselves on which to try out these extraordinary techniques." And of course, the solution to that is just don't tell people what you're going to do to them. It's great. They don't need to know. You're messing up their lives literally for the rest of their lives, but it's fine. We're getting valuable national security data here. So the MKUltra program was meant to provide both human guinea pigs as well as scientific insights. And the project's aims were, quote, the research and development of chemical, biological, and radioactive materials and of techniques for the employment of electroshock capable of producing human behavioral or physiological change. A 1970s FOIA request resulted in the release of many of the documents associated with this program. So really everything that we know about MKUltra is from this FOIA. But important to note here is that in 1973, when the program was kind of abruptly halted on the orders of at that time, CIA Director Richard Helms, most of the MKUltra files that existed at that point were deliberately destroyed. They knew shit was about to hit the fan. There was like a big fallout from Watergate. They were worried that their actions and their initiatives were going to be kind of unveiled and exposed. And so they shut the lights off basically overnight and started destroying as much evidence as they could of what they had been up to for the past 20 years. So if you ever needed a realization that the CIA is not working for we the people whatsoever, and they aren't even working for the government, they're their own thing. That's why Jack calls them the shadow government. They're the ones pulling the strings, figuring out the intel, figuring out the methods to get the intel. and they don't have anybody to answer to. They've been rogue since their inception in the 50s. Okay, so that was 1973. 1975, the Church Committee and Rockefeller Commission investigated CIA abuses, including MK Ultra, which brought the project into public view. And in 1977, 20,000 financial and administrative documents were discovered that had actually been misfiled in the budget office and therefore had escaped Helms' purge of those documents in 73. So that 1970s FOIA request is that request found those 20,000 documents. Obviously, all the documents that had been destroyed were never found. And I remember Jack also talked about finding documents like buried underneath Tulane University in some like dilapidated um, tunnel that like connected to this room that had been completely off limits, but he was doing research there at the time as a resident, and I guess knew some people, and so did some exploring down there in the tunnels and found this room full of documents, a lot of which also pertain to MK Ultra. I don't know if they were among the 20,000 that were discovered in 77. They may have been ones that were somehow also partitioned and not, among the rest and kind of lost from Helm's reach. But Jack makes the point that when Katrina hit on the Gulf Coast, that all of those documents were destroyed as well. And so what we've got is, what's ever left over. Hard to fathom, and we're going to discuss some of the details. Hard to fathom what the contents of those that were prioritized for destruction might have been because the stuff that survived was horrifying. So, how much worse could it get? I don't even know if I want to know. The other thing that really came to mind here as I was going through and, putting these slides together was just the concept of complicity and how many people and institutions and, just individuals and groups in general have to be involved in order to get this kind of thing done. And I had a post on Instagram yesterday about like the push towards efficiency is going to be like the death of humanity, basically. And we're going to talk about that in a little while, probably before we start the documentary, about, this push for efficiency in technology and how it's degrading our biology as humans, but also just all biological life. It's affecting everything that's alive. But that in order to have this push be successful in the adoption of any number of kind of aberrant ideologies to actually be accepted requires people being complicit, whether you're overtly supporting the initiative or you're not speaking up when you're being called to speak up by your soul, by your conscience, whatever you want to call it. It requires so many people to be complicit in order to get these types of things done. And that's really just highlighted by the fact that more than 80 universities and other research institutions were involved in activities related to MK Ultra. And of course, there is some level of plausible deniability, and this goes back to our last lesson about Groves and the Manhattan Project, where he kind of set this precedent showing that you can do completely terrible, treacherous, awful things, but if you keep the people involved in the dark about what they're contributing to, they don't have a guilty conscience. They're not going to go spilling secrets to other nations potentially. They're going to be just focused on their little niche. They're going to get their data, and then when it's brought back to the centralizing force, which in the Manhattan Project was Groves, of course, that individual can connect the dots, and they're the only ones that see the big picture. So it's hard to say how many of the 80 universities and hundreds of faculty involved knew what they were doing, but when I go on to describe some of the details of the sub-projects, it will become very clear that many of these researchers were, I mean, frankly, evil. The things that they were doing in order to understand, quote unquote, the mind and how to manipulate it, it's just reprehensible, like incomprehensible how terrible it is. And especially with the lack of informed consent with regards to the individuals participating. So the program comprised around 150 sub-projects that had a variety of aims. For example, sub-project 7 explored how an individual's memory could be disturbed, how someone could discredit him or her by inducing aberrant behavior, and how information could be extracted from the mind. The primary method that was used for this sub-project was dosing LSD, which was newly discovered at the time and not popular amongst like the larger country or among just like lay people, but it was being probed in the research setting because of its potential to be able to distort consciousness, somebody's experience, and ideally, they wanted to create this truth serum, so they were hoping that LSD could play a part in that. They didn't know at the time because it was very new and they didn't have research to say one way or the other. Another example, Subproject 39 investigated the effects of several drugs and hypnosis during interrogation. And this research was conducted on 142 criminal sexual psychopaths confined at Ionia State Hospital. The subjects were completely unaware of the fact that they were in a research study of this magnitude and of this nature. And many suffered catastrophic, lifelong consequences to their health and their mental states. Just kind of absolutely unfathomable that anybody could do something like that, especially in the name of science. And this is also something that we need to recognize is that science itself is a tool, it's a process, it doesn't have morality. And so it's up to the scientists and the people guiding, policy and research to decide what we should look into, what we should do, and where we should draw the line. Because at some point, you're going to have to draw the line. But we haven't really gotten to a point where where we've been comfortable saying, okay, this is where we're going to stop. And the excuse is always, oh, well, our adversaries are going to do this research, so if we don't do it first, they're going to do it first and get the data first, and then we're going to be at their whim, and so that's always the kind of game that gets played. And of course, the global population at this point are the ones taking the brunt. We're the ones that are getting, the fallout from that. And, meanwhile, all of the elites, according to Catherine Fitz at least, have like a breakaway civilization ready to go and like underground bunkers and like they're ready for catastrophe to strike at any time. And that's like independent of science, let's say, and it could be as a result of a natural disaster or some other type of disaster, whether that's man-made, ET made, or otherwise. But it's kind of like the movie Interstellar, right? Where they, the elites are getting prepared to go live somewhere else on another planet, and the world population has no idea that they're not going along for the ride, that there's no room for them. Um, anyway, a little bit of an aside, but just a couple highlights for sub projects there. We're going to get into one of the other projects, or maybe two, on the next slides. So, as I mentioned, the CIA was ultimately seeking some sort of a truth serum that they could use on people they were interrogating, allegedly. But they also wanted to understand how to manipulate thought and narrative in general as well among a broader population. As I mentioned, many of the research subjects were unwitting. In 1973, 20 years after its inception, Mkultra was stopped abruptly for fear of exposure following the scrutiny of the Watergate scandal, as I mentioned. And due to the destruction of the vast majority of the documents involved, or yeah, highlighting the ongoings of the MKUltra project, the true extent of the experimentation and the resulting damage and scope and results can never truly be known, especially because most of the researchers involved at this point are going to be deceased as well. So, given the lack of documentation, scrutinizing the academic output of researchers known to be involved can help to shed some light. So, we don't necessarily have the MKUltra documents themselves, but if we look at the people who were known to be involved in doing some of the research for MKUltra and look at what they were publishing and what they were reporting, it can give you an idea of what they were up to. So, one kind of infamous example is a researcher by the name of Donald Ewan Cameron. He was the president of the World Psychiatric Association and a psychiatrist at McGill University's Allen Memorial Institute. When I read that, I was immediately horrified and also just immediately reflected on the fact that psychiatry has really not improved even since the 70s or prior. We're not lobotomizing people anymore, and that's great. But, if you look at the tools that we are using in psychiatry, one could argue that they're equally as horrific if you look at the long-term effects, like SSRIs are one really good example. And actually, there was something I saw online today that was talking about the ramifications of SSRI use in people with the sexual dysfunction, with the detachment from emotion in general, and feeling love and feeling empathy. That, if you try to eliminate the lows of emotion, that you also restrict the highs. So you can't, there's no magic pill to just remove you from experiencing the lows and like the negative emotions of life, because it's a polarity, right? If you don't experience the negatives, you also can't experience the positives. And so what those drugs are doing is they're just reducing your range of emotion. They're reducing your range of human experience. And there's also direct mechanistic underpinning that shuts down essentially neuronal innervation of like the genitals, so they're creating this kind of numbness and like anorgasmia, as well as just disinterest in sex in general. And I think people probably don't think that's a big deal until they experience it themselves, and then it's enough to like basically want to kill yourself, right? Because what an incredible way to connect with another person, especially one that you really care about, is through a sexual experience that is transcendent in some way, right? And if you can't experience that, it's also really hard to experience transcendence in general. And when you're disconnected from transcendence, you're essentially disconnected from your soul, right? Because what's the most transcendent aspect of being human? It's connection to a higher power, to a higher part of you that is kind of ineffable, but is very ever present. And so, the technology or the tools used in psychiatry today are still very barbaric, in my opinion, and nothing is actually addressing the root issues that people are experiencing with regards to a lack of meaning in their life, with regards to, immense amounts of debt. People are experiencing real issues. It's not something you need to drug. People are working jobs they hate for corporations that are, working against us at every turn. And then, you go to a psychiatrist and they want to numb out those feelings that you are feeling that are very valid, that are trying to drive you into something that's going to light you up more, that is going to, not only support you financially, but also at a deeper level as well. So the more that you numb out from those signals, the more you're going to get stuck in a direction that, your body, your spirit, your conscience, your soul, whatever you want to say, is not okay with. And so, of course, that's not a solution, right? At best, that's a very short-term solution. And the other problem with these psychiatric drugs is once you're on them, they're very, very hard to get off of. And in the case of drugs like benzos, within a week, you develop a severe physical dependency that if you don't wean off these drugs, you could literally die if you tried to go off them cold turkey. So it's a whole can of worms. And so I just kind of laughed ironically to myself that this Donald Cameron character was literally president of the World Psychiatric Association, like the expert of experts in psychiatry and psychology. And he's out here doing the most horrendous things you could imagine, which we're going to talk about in a moment. So, the CIA set up a front organization to covertly finance Cameron's studies on human subjects. And it's unclear whether Cameron was actually aware of the fact that he had been conducting experiments for the CIA, because he actually died before MKUltra was ultimately exposed. And again, this is just kind of a hat tip to the siloing that Groves so eloquently came up with to help keep his researchers in the dark. But despite of the fact, like, it doesn't really matter whether Cameron knew he was contributing to MK Ultra or not, because the shit that he was doing was the darkest that you could ever imagine, which we're going to talk about now. So Cameron led Sub-Project 68, and within the scope of that project, he developed two methods. One he called psychic driving, and the other he called depatterning. So in psychic driving, this is what he devised. So Cameron subjected patients to spoken messages on looped tapes with the aim of reprogramming their personalities. For up to 20 hours a day, including during drug-induced prolonged sleep, patients would be forced to listen to the same sentence over and over again. Speakers were even placed under patients' pillows. Cameron used short-spoken messages such as, quote, "It is the truth," or, quote, "Stop it, it makes me weak." Playback sessions could last over the course of more than a week. While the messages were being played, Cameron administered paralytic and sedative drugs to, quote, "disinhibit the patients." Sodium amytal, for example, was used on a subject, quote, so that his defenses might be reduced. LSD was also used on unwitting individuals. At the time, the drug was not known to the general public, and patients kept ignorant of the fact that they were being dosed, let alone having consented to being subjected to any of these procedures, were psychologically uprooted by its overwhelming effects because they were using quite high doses. This wasn't a fun, trippy, giddy, like experience. No. This was like mind bending, earth shattering. Obviously, you don't even know that you've been dosed. So you probably just think you're losing your mind. This type of experience, completely different than any sort of consensual recreational LSD experience. So during this psychic driving experience or process, the individual was also isolated, not only from external stimuli by putting him in a dark room, covering his eyes with goggles, reducing auditory intake, and preventing him from touching his body, thus interfering with his image and sense of self. But attempts were also made to cut down on his expressive outflow, verbally, for example. And I'm guessing that somewhat means like a, either gagging them or like keeping the limbs down so that you can't, move your hands, you can't speak. So this is psychic driving. Sounds like a lovely experience, right? Depatterning, on the other hand, was conducted by injecting barbiturates. So Cameron held his patients in continuous sleep for several days or even weeks, which served to ensure that they were, quote, drowsy and under control before intensive shock therapy was started. After that period of time, 6 strong electric shocks were then given twice a day over the course of at least a month. And psychoactive substances were sometimes used concomitantly. Can you imagine being dosed with a psychedelic and then shocked multiple times every day for a month? Talk about a bad trip. Like, I cannot even imagine what that experience would be like for a person. The electric shocks resulted in massive memory disturbances. Cameron described 3 stages that his patients underwent. In the final stage, not only was any space-time image entirely distorted, but the patients also experienced the loss of their second language and of key information about their lives. A typical patient would, quote, be unable to walk without support, to feed himself. He may show double incontinence. He lives, as it were, in a very narrow segment of time and space. He cannot well record what is going on around him, and he cannot retrieve data from the past. One patient's story, his name was Bob Logie, was admitted to Allen Memorial Institute for pain in his leg that was deemed psychosomatic. So this guy goes to the hospital with a pain in his leg. Conveniently, it's labeled as psychosomatic, and he gets funneled into this dystopian program. Bob was kept asleep for 23 days, dosed with LSD, and subjected to the recurrent messages played from loop tapes. Decades later, he still suffered from insomnia and severe depression induced by the experimental treatments. He commented, quote, I dream about it. All my waking hours I think about it. It's eating me up. Okay. So, although MKUltra officially ended in 1973, the interest in mind control and manipulation not only persisted, but I would argue it intensified, actually. In 2011, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA, which Dr. Joseph Farrell calls the Diabolically Apocalyptic Research Projects Agency, which I'm stealing and using forever, which is a research body of the DoD that's tasked with the development of military technologies. So DARPA subcontracted researchers at Arizona State University to carry out a project with the aim of exploring the neuropsychology of narrative and persuasion. The project's findings were to, quote, help the United States government to convince world populations of its good intentions and to dissuade key constituencies from the powerful narratives told by violent extremists. And also, just a side note, anybody who said anything about the lab leak hypothesis, about the jabs being, experimental and toxic, would be labeled as a violent extremist, by the way. So, this is a very, very vague umbrella for wanting to use persuasive techniques on large swaths of the population. Um, so, to this end, scientists were supposed to, quote, generate the knowledge to effectively understand, model, and disrupt narratives on a neurological level, and the capability to induce powerful narrative phenomena with certainty. The researchers planned to use transcranial magnetic stimulation, a non-invasive method of brain stimulation based on electromagnetic induction, to quote, selectively alter aspects of narrative structure and brain functioning to induce or disrupt selective features of narrative processing. And now that I'm reading that, I'm just thinking, because clearly DARPA's goal was to be able to impact large populations, because they go out of their way to say to help the US government convince world populations of its good intentions, which means that you would need a technology working at a large scale. It can't be individuals going in for transcranial magnetic stimulation. It would have to be something that is, you know, permeating the environment, or something that is, what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, pervasive is fine. Anyway, I don't know what word I'm thinking of. But I can't help but think of like the 5G rollout now. Because we know that especially millimeter waves, which are the 5G antennas, they use millimeter waves in cities and urban areas. They're very strong, very penetrant. They have high penetrance rather. And so obviously that's not magnetic stimulation per se, that's radio frequencies, but perhaps it doesn't have to be a magnetic flux. Perhaps you can use other, electromagnetic frequencies such as radio frequencies to get the job done. Anyway, I have a lot to think about now that this just occurred to me, but if this project were actually carried out, because apparently the Arizona State University never actually did the experiments for this project, but clearly the intention was there. That was 14 years ago. If we think that that intention suddenly just vanished into the horizon, we're kidding ourselves. And so I think it'll be very interesting to kind of sit and think about how that might be implemented with ubiquitous technologies, which is the word I was trying to think of. Um, and among the most ubiquitous technologies today is cell towers, and in particular, the 5G rollout that happened conveniently during COVID lockdowns. Let me check the chat. I saw something happen there. Can I see the chat, please? No. Okay. Yeah, How did you know I meant to say ubiquitous? Yeah, thank you. Okay. Okay, so that's something to think about. Let me know if any of y'all thinking about or watching this in the future when you catch the replay, or Nick as well, if you think of anything else that might be ubiquitous. I mean, Wi-Fi is ubiquitous. We should actually just make a list of all of the electromagnetic technologies that are ubiquitous. Obviously, this could also be done through propaganda, so through the manipulation of algorithms now that everybody is plugged into social media. By manipulating algorithms, you also manipulate narratives directly just through information exposure. So there's that. But there may be deeper ways to make people more suggestible as well. Which, yeah, I mean, obviously, the other kind of ubiquitous technology that got rolled out recently were the jabs. Over 80% of Americans took at least one dose. Billions of doses were given out worldwide. So it's something to think about. Okay. But in addition to that, we also have this push towards wearables or implantables like Neuralink. And despite the fact that they're being marketed as having benevolent intentions, helping people who lost the use of their limbs, for example, this technology could very easily be used towards the same ends if in the hands of the wrong entity or entities. Um, so we can't rule that out as well. When you have something directly plugged into your biology that is working at a very fundamental level, you know, suddenly, for people who lost the use of their limbs, they can use their hands again, but they're also getting ads for their car's extended warranty in the middle of their dreams. that's a toy example, right? It could be much worse than that. So, uh, there's a book here by Jose Delgado, written in 1969, and I believe the documentary that we're going to be watching will also highlight Jose Delgado's work. Apparently, he was never officially involved in MK Ultra, but the results of his experiment were direct interest to the CIA and to the MK Ultra program broadly. He was the one, if you remember correctly, from Jack's exposés on this topic, that Jose Delgado was the one who implanted little kind of receivers into the brains of bulls, like the charging bulls that you would see in Spain, for example. And he was able to stop them mid-charge with that receivers by sending a specific frequency radio signal to the receiver to shut off their aggression. And so that's what he was kind of famous for. And I think we're going to see clips from that in the documentary, as I mentioned, because I watched the beginning of it, so I remember seeing that. But he wrote this book, which has a very interesting title: Physical Control of the Mind Toward a Psycho-Civilized Society. Does it get any more dystopian than that? I don't know. I don't know. A lot to unpack there. Pack there. Physical control of the mind, implying a connection between the mind, which is kind of this intangible, etheric substance or locale, and being able to tap into that through the physical brain, perhaps, or the body in general, toward a psycho-civilized society. Psycho-civilized, does that mean everybody's in lockstep? Does that mean, that everybody's the same? We're basically talking about Marxism, right? In its ideal play out, in that everybody is equal, everybody is same. Any contrarian thoughts or actions are immediately policed to protect the ideology, to maintain the quote unquote peace. But conveniently, there are people who are always outside of that sameness and oneness, who are the elites, who get to do whatever they want, who get to control the money, who get to, do whatever they want, that the rules don't apply to them. That's the rules for thee, but not for me. Conveniently, that's always how Marxism and communism plays out. Like, I don't know, it's almost like it's a human nature thing. And yet somehow some people still fall into the trap of thinking that's the goal. That's where we need to go. Everything will be peaceful and harmonious. The thing that people don't realize is that in order for communism to work, you have to love each other, right? Like a family unit is a communist. It's communist in nature. But the thing that holds it together is love between the individuals in the unit. If you love each other, you're not going to stab each other in the back. You're going to want to support each other willingly. But if we're talking about an entire nation state full of people who will never meet, never know each other, it can be hard to have empathy for somebody else when you're having your own struggles. And so it is human nature to prioritize the survival of yourself over the survival of somebody else. And so communism cannot work at scale. It is impossible, because it's impossible to be considerate over millions of other people especially when you're being, victimized and drained of all you've got by your government, which is what always happens in communism. How many times do we have to replay that tape in order to understand that this is not going to work? And actually, so on that post that I made yesterday, about like the push towards efficiency and how this is like a neo-Marxist idea and ideology, I had a couple really insightful comments on the post, and one of them was from a woman who grew up in the Soviet Union, and she talked about how just awful it was, and how she lives here in the United States now, and she sees us devolving exactly into that old model, and she cannot believe it. She can't believe that people don't see it. And I think for that reason, the Eastern European countries now are among the most based and awake, because it's very visceral. That experience is very recent for them. It's in the past century. And so because that experience is so present in their bloodlines or in their direct experiences, because some of these people are still alive, of course, Many of them are still alive. The Soviet Union didn't fall until, Reagan's administration. And so in that case, they're like, we're not doing that. We're not going back to that. We know how that ends. And yet everybody in America, I mean, not everybody, but a large swath of the population is like completely blissfully unaware of the direction that we're heading if we keep going and doing the things that we're doing. And so it's very interesting to see. I think people are also waking up though, and I think the American spirit is actually pretty strong. It is being squashed largely by our technology and by our environments, but it's still alive. So it'll be very interesting to see how things play out because at some point, I think the vast majority of the population is going to put their foot down and be like, no, we're not doing this. And it's probably going to be when the brain chips roll out. I think the technocrats vastly overestimate the number of people who will be like, yay, give me my brain chip. I can't wait. It's not happening. It's not happening. I think they think it's going to happen, but it's just not happening. Um, okay. And so with that, let's head over to the documentary. I think I have it pulled up here. Whoops. Yes, I do. Okay. So let me stop sharing and go to share this other one. This is it. All right. Oh, there's something in the chat. The subtitle is insane. I agree. Okay. Oops. Can I press play? Okay.
This is the story of a 30-year search by U.S. intelligence agencies to perfect mind control. Some of those engaged in that search have agreed to talk about it for the first time. One said, I think every last one of us felt sorry to attempt this kind of thing. We knew we were crossing the line. This
Can we just like pause there? Every single one of us knew that we were crossing the line, and yet they did it anyway. Ugh, humans can be so frustrating. It's that group think, that lockstep where it's like you're scared to speak out and, act in alignment with your conscience because you don't want to stand out and be singled out from the group. It's that fear of ostracization that is like deep within our DNA because ancestrally, if you were ostracized from your group, from your clan, you basically die. You can't be alone. We're very social creatures, and so we often bend our wills to meet the social paradigm at hand. And it's got to stop at some point. Like at some point, somebody has to be the one to say no. And then once one person stands up, it's much easier for then momentum to build because now, if one person sticks their neck out, then the second person doesn't feel as vulnerable because one person already did it. And so it builds momentum. But at some point, you got to stand up for, what you believe in, what you know is right. And, clearly that didn't happen in this case. And if you look at history in general, it very rarely happens. If you look at Stalinist Russia, if you look at the Holocaust, you just go back for all of the documented human history and civilization, we just keep going through the same thing over and over again. Atrocity after atrocity because people are fearful of being singled out in some way. It's pretty wild to think about.
search would be endless. From brothels, an agent says, we learned a lot about human nature in the bedroom.
That reminds me, one of the subset operations of MKUltra was Operation Midnight Climax. Definitely check out what is the name of him? There's a man who was on Joe Rogan's podcast that actually wrote a really good book that I very much enjoy about the Manson family and MKUltra. Nick will probably know the name because I feel like you can just like extract things from my mind somehow and then just type them in the chat. Um, but so Operation Midnight Climax is when they had a bunch of Johns, so like John Does, in a brothel and they dosed them with LSD and watched them have like literal CIA agents watched John Does having sex with prostitutes while tripping on LSD for research purposes. Like, okay, sorry you have repressed kinks, dudes. Like, can you like kind of exercise it in a different way? But I don't know what they found from those experiments, and maybe they're going to talk about it in this. I don't know. But just another example of how just preposterous this entire program was.
To the mystical rites of a magical mushroom ceremony performed by an Indian shaman. To a Spanish bull ring. The bull has had electrodes implanted in the brain,
That's Jose
which
Delgado.
controlled by a scientist. There would be victims. Intelligence agency try to peel this man's mind back to reveal its deepest secrets. Live through it. I lived through it. This man worked on some of these programs. He would write of his work, it was fun, fun, fun.
Fun, fun, fun.
This is the
Wow.
story of the search for mind control. ABC News close-up.
Oh, shit. Hold on, let me pause. Can I pause this? Okay, so Nick wrote in the chat, interesting to note, MK Ultra ended in 73 and Tuskegee trials ended in 72. All of these experiments were surely where surely people knew what they were doing yet was inhumane and yet they kept going. 100%. No, not Jillian Michaels. Actually, where's my phone? Hmm, do I have it? It's so the book was called like hold on. Let me just find it really quick. The book is called Chaos, Manson, the CIA and the Secret History of the 60s. And it was by Tom O'Neill. That's right. So Tom O'Neill's book. Very, very good. Check out his episode with Joe Rogan. It was a few years ago, but it was a very, very good episode. Um, okay. Great note about the Tuskegee experiments. Equally horrific.
Fire.
It's been ages that I bought allow me. Do Michelob Lights.
Michelob makes a light beer? Perfect.
A good taste of Michelob Light. Don't just compare it to other light beers.
What's this?
Compare it to your regular beer. It's that good.
You always did go first class.
Your ticket to San Francisco.
San Francisco.
You too?
The hell?
Mrs. Cooper, I need help. Oh, with all these different dog foods, I don't know what kind of.
We're watching commercials right now? Actually, these will be kind of fun to psychoanalyze, so let's watch them. Usually I'm very anti-ad, but I don't have an option to skip them either, so.
Oh, no. Whatever. But Cycle 2 dog food is especially for dogs ages 1 to 7, like mine. The Cycle 2 formula has just what dogs in their active years need to help stay healthy.
Oh, look, junk food for dogs.
No, to feed them.
Now get Cycle 2 in 25-pound bags.
We are not professing to tell you the complete story of these activities. We are professing to tell you the complete story that we know.
Right.
But these records that we've uncovered don't tell the story. They tell pieces of it.
This is a story that has been told in bits and pieces. This is an attempt to pull most of it together. We know we don't have the full story. We do, however, have some striking new revelations and insights. The story begins here, just off the nation's front yard, the Mall. The buildings behind me were the headquarters for the World War II Office of Strategic Services. It was here that the first halting steps toward mind control began. The shaper and molder of OSS was General Wild Bill Donovan. He said of his group's work, "We may have made mistakes, but we were not afraid to try things that were never done before." In this
That's one way to put it.
atmosphere, Donovan appointed this man, Stanley Lovell, a Boston industrialist, to break new ground in many scientific and technical fields. Donovan called Lovell his Dr. Moriarty, after the fiendish professor in Sherlock Holmes. Lovell liked the name and posed for this Saturday Evening Post photo. He later wrote of his OSS job that it was, quote, to stimulate the Peck's bad boy beneath the surface of every American scientist and to say to him, throw all of your normal law abiding concepts out of the window. Here's a chance to raise merry hell. It was in this atmosphere that the search for mind control began. This bizarre man would be an active participant in that search over the next 2 decades. His name is George White, an OSS captain who had formerly been with the Bureau of Narcotics. In his diary, seen here publicly for the first time, White left a legacy of the darker side of American intelligence work. He received his early OSS training at the British-run school at Oshawa, Canada, the same school where Ian Fleming, the creator of James Bond, was trained. White referred to the school in his diaries as the Oshawa School of Mayhem and Murder.
What the hell?
Mike Burke, former OSS colleague of White's and now president of Madison Square Garden Center.
Very compelling fellow, mysterious fellow, almost mystical fellow. He was fascinating because you know something about him, but not enough about him to really get a fix on him.
These haircuts are awful.
He also knew a great deal about the swifter elements of society, the gamier side of life, and he was very impressive in his technical knowledge of the underworld, so to speak.
He said one of our men gets beat up. He says you have to act real fast and teach these guys a lesson.
Charles Siragusa, a former narcotics officer and friend of White's.
He'll turn around and he says, and break your kneecaps. And with that, one guy laughed. And George would always had a little Billy with him. And this one guy saw us naked. George White turned around and whapped him across the neck with it. Then he picked up a pool stick and started beating everybody up.
He made his point.
And he made his point.
George White was not a man of understatement or subtleties. His boss at OSS, Stanley Lovell, referred to him as deadly and dedicated. In this note from White's diaries, it says, call Lovell regarding TD. TD was a rather transparent cover for Truth Drug. George White worked with the Truth Drug Committee here at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in the nation's capital. They experimented with mescaline, scopolamine, and marijuana on unwitting victims. The committee soon learned there was no easy panacea, no truth drug at this stage. But White and later colleagues would not stop trying. The goal remained the same. As this 1952 CIA memo says, the aim is controlling an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will, and even against such fundamental laws of nature as self-preservation. But it was a discovery here in Basel, Switzerland, at Sandoz Laboratories by Dr. Albert Hoffman that led the intelligence agencies of America to believe that they had found the panacea. The discovery was lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD. The film that you see is considered by many experts to be the closest illustration of the effects of a hallucinogenic.
It was one of
I disagree completely.
the first times that anybody had run into a powerful drug that was different than anything else that they knew anything about.
John Gittinger, recently retired chief psychologist for the CIA. This is the first time Gittinger has been interviewed publicly.
You could disable a whole city by putting.
Actually, I just want to make the note that it's very obvious that none of these researchers actually took the drugs themselves, like consensually, like willfully. But therein actually lies a difference because if you're being dosed without knowing, you're gonna have a very different experience, especially when it's combined with things like electroshock and looping audios and other dystopian things. But I think one thing that they underestimated quite a bit is the fact that psychedelics actually, connect you more to your higher self in a way, or to your heart center at the very least. So that would be the opposite of what they would want if they're trying to control somebody. But again, that could probably be manipulated by doing other things to the person to disconnect them from that. So anyway, I think a good baseline for research, especially with human subjects, is if you wouldn't have the procedure or the intervention done on yourself, you shouldn't be doing it on somebody else. That's a pretty good moral baseline, I would say.
A very small amount on water supply. After all of these years of us, those of us who are involved in looking for this secret drug, this was the only thing that began to look for the first time like it might be something like that.
CIA's interest in LSD was intense. The worry was that the Russians would get hold of it. Were the Soviets into LSD?
I'm going to have to say I'm sure they were, but if you ask me to prove it, I've never seen any direct proof of it.
But at one point, intelligence information received from Switzerland said that Sandoz Laboratories was about to put 100 million doses of LSD on the open market. And it caused enough concern within the agency that the United States was prepared to buy the entire supply. However, a slight mistake had been made.
I really want to know what led them to even think that LSD would be like the panacea truth drug. Like, what information did they become privy to that would make them think that to begin with? I'll look into it a little bit, see if I can find anything. There's got to be something. If they're willing to buy the lot, I'm sure that's quite a bit of taxpayer money that they're spending there, or maybe they just printed it. It's possible. They probably just printed it. But they must have had some pretty strong motivations to want to do that.
The mistake is made public for the first time.
I just found out on a new CIA document that there were no such large quantities of LSD on the market.
Joan Marks has filed numerous Freedom of Information suits against the CIA and has unearthed much new material. He is the author of The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, a
Ooh,
history of intelligence agency work with mind control.
we should read that.
He is a consultant for this report.
What happened is that there was a military attaché in Switzerland, an American officer, who got milligrams and kilograms mixed up. In other words, he made a mistake of thinking 1/1000th of a gram was the same as 1,000 grams.
Oh my
It was
God.
a mistake of a million times. So when the CIA got the intelligence that there were 100 million doses on the market, in fact, there were 100 doses.
The
Haha.
man who would oversee the CIA's research into drugs and most of the agency's behavior programs is this man, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, a chemist. Dr.
Oh,
Gottlieb declined ABC News
I didn't know he was a chemist, but he's quite famous in this whole world.
request for an interview. In their never-ending search for the miracle weapon, CIA operatives searched here in the remote mountain areas of southern Mexico for what up to then had been considered a myth, magic mushrooms.
A myth?
They used this man, a part-time chemist for the CIA, to dupe this man, a vice president of a bank and an amateur mycologist or mushroom expert, to try to get to the magic mushrooms and turn them into a drug. But it would be the amateur, R. Gordon Wasson and his colleagues, who would win the race,
Oh shit.
develop the drug psilocybin from the magic mushrooms.
We went into the Mazatec area, far from the highways, remote from Mexico City. There we found that rotten bagasse, as it's called, bagasso, covered with mushrooms. These mushrooms I didn't know, had never seen. They were the sacred mushrooms.
Wasson would also discover and record the ancient mystical rites of the mushrooms from a local shaman or magical priestess, Maria Sabina.
Mm-hmm.
And we were seeing incredible sights. They would go slowly or they would go fast as I ordained. All your senses are rendered acute. We say that you see visions, you see hallucinations, but that doesn't begin to tell this story. The hallucinations are only part of it. You hear sounds, you smell things. The night was thrilling.
Word of Wasson's discovery reached the CIA quickly. Dr. James Moore, a University of Delaware chemist, secretly served the CIA preparing deadly chemicals on short notice. Moore was instructed to get close to Wasson and accompany him on another trip to Mexico to get the magic mushrooms.
I had no idea that Wasson's team was like infiltrated with CIA people. It's pretty interesting. No wonder none of the indigenous tribes anywhere in the world trust us at all, nor should they. It's a whole mess.
Internal documents show the CIA felt a drug derived from the mushrooms could remain an agency secret. What in the world were they looking for with the magic mushrooms?
I think the best answer to that is that they were looking for fundamental information on compounds that would be capable of causing changes in behavior, changes in mental attitude.
Did you ever consider what would have happened if any of these substances were given to, say, unwitting people?
Oh, I don't remember having considered that specifically.
What if you, I trust perhaps you've thought about it.
Well, I haven't worried about it. You,
Of course, he hasn't worried about it. He's like, I'm not gonna be one of the unwitting subjects, so why do I care?
your question again, what would I have thought had I known that
Any of these substances
would have been given to,
unwitting persons.
you mean a hostile agent of another government?
No, I mean,
think that was probably
I mean,
one of the things they had in mind.
testing it out on an American citizen.
I
Ah,
I guess I must seem very, very cold-blooded about this, but I don't recall ever having been very much preoccupied with that issue.
yeah, Nick in the chat just said this is reminiscent of watching a Sam Altman or Peter Thiel interview. Couldn't agree more. Oh my gosh, it's like, okay, we can clearly see that y'all are lying and like trying to tiptoe around the truth at the very least, or be, I don't know, what's the word, diplomatic in some way, but it's so obvious. I mean, maybe they're just hoping we think that they're autistic, but I mean, they might be autistic, but also nefarious. Like, there's no way around it.
But many drugs were tested in this way. A decision was made at the
Yeah, exactly. You can't pause for 10 seconds before answering if you think that. I think for Teal, it was like, do you even think humanity should exist in the future? He's like, well,
highest levels of the CIA to do testing on unwitting Americans. As one CIA document says, such testing would be operationally realistic. A former CIA official who worked on these programs describes for the first time how the decision was made. He did not wish to be filmed or recorded. Thus, his remarks are read by someone else.
I think every last one of us felt sorry to attempt this kind of thing. We knew we were crossing a line. Every decent kid knows he shouldn't steal, but he does it sometimes. We knew damn well we didn't want anyone else
you're not kids, you're freaking adults. Bad analogy.
to know what we were doing.
The decision was made to do testing on unwitting victims. It was decided they should be on the fringes of society because they were most vulnerable.
It was the borderline underworld. Prostitutes, drug addicts, and other small timers would be powerless to seek any kind of revenge.
Small timers? Oh my god, this is like almost unlistenable.
In case they found out.
And as their predecessors had a decade earlier, the CIA turned to George White for help. White was now a high-ranking narcotics official, and by this time, the stories about George White were legendary.
So the waiter says, you may help you, monsieur? And George White was busy talking with me. I paid no attention to the waiter, so the waiter tapped him on his shoulder, says, may I help you, monsieur? George White turned around, whipped his gun out, and stuck it in the guy's face like this in this crowded restaurant.
What?
George White did not mind bending the law, and he knew the street well. He was the ideal choice for what the CIA had in mind.
Imagine being so protected by intelligence that you can literally do whatever the hell you want and you don't have to worry about consequences. That that must feel You probably feel like a god, right? But that's a very dangerous place to be because the moment they don't need you anymore, that could be it for you. But pretty crazy that this guy was some bigwig instead of in jail where he clearly belonged based on his actions. Let's see how it continues.
We were Ivy League, white, middle class. We were naive, totally naive about this, and he felt pretty expert. He knew the whores, the pimps, the people who brought in the drugs.
White set up so-called safe houses for the CIA in New York, here in Greenwich Village, and later in San Francisco, in this hotel, and in an apartment atop Telegraph Hill with a commanding view of San Francisco Bay. While the existence of these safe houses was disclosed last year, details of what took place within them has not been told. A former CIA official who worked in the safe houses reveals that they were used not only for drug testing, but to study sexual behavior and how it could be used to manipulate people.
We did quite a study of prostitutes and their behavior. How do you take a woman who is willing to use her body to get money out of a guy to get him to talk about things which are much more important, like state secrets? We learned a lot about human nature in the bedroom. We started to pick up knowledge that could be used in operations.
There would be victims in all of this, but as the agency knew, they couldn't fight back. Some entries from George White's diaries. Clarice gets horror.
He kept diaries? This just seems out of character. He's putting guns up to people's faces in crowded restaurants and also keeping a diary?
Janet, sky high. As one agency memo says, we have no answer to the moral question. The safe houses were not the only testing grounds. Millions of dollars would be spent on LSD research at universities throughout the country, and word would begin to spread on campus about this so-called mind-blowing drug. And suddenly, there was the counterculture of the 60s.
I give the CIA a total credit for sponsoring and initiating the entire consciousness movement, counterculture events of the 1960s.
Dr. Timothy Leary, the 1960s Johnny Appleseed of LSD.
The CIA funded and supported and encouraged hundreds of young psychiatrists to experiment with this drug. The fallout from that was that the young psychologists began taking it themselves, discovering that it was an intelligence enhancing, consciousness raising experience. I know that some of the studies in which the CIA had supported used as subjects people who later became strong proselytizers of LSD. So, in that sense, yes, I think it did sustain the perpetuation of the use of the drug. And it's rather ironic, isn't it?
The counter case that I would make in relationship to that is to remember that the people who were doing the research were people who would be doing the research regardless of who was the sponsor. I don't think anybody working in that time in the remotest ever thought that it would blow up into the kind of thing that it did.
History will judge the role of the CIA and other intelligence agencies in unwittingly contributing to the counterculture of the 60s through their intense interest in LSD and other hallucinogenics. But for the moment at least, the argument can be made that the CIA helped usher in the age of Aquarius.
ABC News Close-Up will continue in a moment.
I feel like I'm gonna sound kind of paranoid saying this, but I feel very skeptical of the recent normalization of psychedelics in the mainstream through like Maps's work and through like the PTSD roots. And I'm not saying that these drugs, these medicines can't be helpful in some contexts, but I'm very skeptical at the state government sanctioned use of them and acceptance of them. And I can't help but feel like in the counterculture, they saw this mass impact, right? They saw this mass response to LSD being introduced and other psychedelics being introduced into the populace. And then, of course, they locked that shit down for decades. You know, these drugs were made, you know, the most illegal, Schedule One, like no medical use, no nothing. And now the fact that those laws are being loosened up, it makes me feel like whatever research they were doing to understand how to leverage psychedelics for their own benefit, for maybe shifting narratives, etc., and mindsets, that perhaps they figured out how to do it better at scale. Anyway, I feel like this sounds paranoid. I'm gonna have to think about it more, but I just don't think that it's a coincidence. And I don't think it's just a matter of policy and you know, good-hearted people doing a lot of grassroots work to make this possible. And there certainly are people doing really good grassroots work to help people with PTSD and depression and, you know, other issues. But again, the state sanctioned and institution sanctioned use of these things feels very gross to me. It gives me the ick. I don't trust it. So, anyway.
Being careful about my body doesn't just mean major things like regular breast exams. I'm even careful about pain relievers. Plain aspirin sometimes upset my stomach, so I use bufferin. It adds protection.
Why do I feel like watching this ad was like programming me? Or Tylenol! Exactly. For people who watch this in the far future, today is the 25th of September, and recently Trump and Bobby Kennedy released an announcement around the use of Tylenol during pregnancy contributing to autism among children. And in response to that, there are a bunch of women on the left downing bottles of Tylenol online while pregnant as a way to say, like, screw you, it's safe. Meanwhile, a massive meta-analysis was published this summer, last year, and in 2021 around this association of Tylenol use during pregnancy and autism, as well as ADHD among children who were exposed in utero. So, yeah, that's what we're dealing with now culturally at this moment in time where we're recording.
Careful about what goes into my body. Bufferin gives me an added relief action I want. Tylenol doesn't.
Screw you, Tylenol.
An added relief action in many cases that Tylenol never provides, and protection ingredient, bufferin.
Now I'm careful to get both with bufferin.
Was sinks out clogged with grease. Use Crystal Drano.
I can't believe that. I can't believe that either. What the hell?
Plumber.
Don't. It may not work on this pump.
No?
Crystal Drano will. Look, liquid plumber's quiet. It's not melting that grease.
Drano is. Will Drano hurt metal pipes?
Oh.
So
What the fuck?
break that grease clog. I'm switching to Drano.
To make clogs go, better use Drano.
Saturday, live on ABC. Forest Hills Men's Invitational from the legendary West Side Tennis Club. And live, third round coverage of the most prestigious ladies golf event. Alice Sneezy goes for her third straight U.S. Women's Open title. Red Hot Nancy Lopez shoots for her elusive first Open victory. On ABC's Live World of Sports, rodeo excitement from the Wild West, plus high speeds, high thrills, hydroplane action, championship tennis, golf at ABC's Live World of Sports Saturday.
Wow.
Wednesday on 8 is enough. The Bradford girls go.
This is such a blast from the past watching these commercials. I feel kind of weird. I don't know. This is bizarre.
Disco crazy.
Hiya, hon. What do you say we get down?
The summer's off to a red hot start. And Charlie's Angels play the horses,
I want to be a jockey.
but end up in a dead heat with Dan. Then, the ghost of Jack the Ripper haunts the back streets of Vegas.
Tomorrow, starting at 8, 7 Central and Mountain.
Oh
on
yeah. You're right. There was no music in the background. Very weird. I feel like everything is super cringy and like it just feels very propaganda-y. Just straight dialogue. Yeah. And it's like it feels like hyperbole. All the commercials are like hyperbole too, which is interesting. Hmm.
Covering the span of history, such as we are in this report,
Did you see that obelisk, the Washington Monument? According to Joseph Farrell's work, if you, well, it's not his work, but he's done the research to report on this, that if you look at the very tall, skinny, pointed pyramids, obelisks like the Washington Monument, that shape is associated with something that is acts as an antenna, and a wide, flat pyramid can act as a receiver, and that the Great Pyramid of Giza actually has the exact proportions that combine both the reception, the receiver, and the antenna capabilities. Just a little fun fact.
one can get sidetracked by the so-called glamour and mystery of espionage work, or by the exotic qualities of some drugs. But what you can't lose sight of is what all of this would mean in terms of individual human beings. There would be deaths, there would be long-lasting and harmful effects.
The best known case is that of this man, Frank Olson, a chemist employed by the Army Chemical Corps, who in 1953 was slipped LSD unknowingly at a meeting with CIA officials.
What?
Shortly after that, Olson went into severe depression. He ended his life at this New York hotel by diving through a shaded closed window in his 10th floor room.
Oh my God.
Frank Olson was the first known fatality in the CIA's LSD program. Olson left behind a widow Alice and 3 children, but it would be years before they learned the real story of his death.
Oh.
Shortly after his suicide, Alice Olson was visited by Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the man who had administered the drug, and by Robert Lashbrook, his deputy, who was the last person with Frank Olson the night of his death.
It was probably to check me out and see whether I was handling myself and handling the situation, whether I was hysterical. And I'm sure they left the house feeling ever so much better because I had been gracious and hospitable to them, so that I must have played right into their hand and made them feel fine.
23 years later, did you?
People talked so differently back in the 70s. Like, actually, just any time pre-90s, probably. I feel like everybody, like, articulated words differently. It almost sounds like an accent of some sort. Almost like it's slightly British, but not. It's very bizarre. I thought it was just an actor and actresses thing, but she clearly was talking like that. And I mean, maybe she was doing it just for the camera, but I think it's just interesting to see how language shape shifts over time. And you can clearly see that we're being dumbed down culturally like crazy. People don't they I actually noticed because I have a 14-year-old stepson, everything gets abbreviated in text messages. They don't even spell out all right. It's just ALR. I'm like, bro, your generation is so lazy. And it's probably because they're bioenergetically collapsing because it's cumulative over the generations, right? So it's this push towards efficiency. At some point, if your biology becomes so impaired, you actually rely on efficiency in your systems to get by, right? Because you don't even have the fortitude to do the things that you would have been able to do if your mitochondria were actually, functional at a high level. So it's a very interesting and complex issue.
How did you feel about that, Nate?
My anger was unbelievable at how I had been duped for this length of time, and the anguish which was unnecessary.
Anyone who knew during all of those years never told Alice Olson the real story of her husband's death. She would discover it by accident more than 2 decades later. In essence, it was a 22-year-long cover-up.
Wow.
Lyman Kirkpatrick was Inspector General of the CIA at the time of Frank Olson's death.
But had not the Olson case occurred within the secret confines of the CIA, would not this case have been a prosecutable case? Perhaps
I would think very definitely prosecutable, and certainly from the point of view of the of Mr. Olson, why it should have probably been actionable.
Frank Olson.
So what he's saying is it was a crime, but because the CIA did it, they're above the law. Good to know.
Suicide slowed down the CIA's testing of LSD and other drugs, but only momentarily. The CIA was not the only government agency interested in the possibilities LSD and other drugs presented for mind control. The Army Chemical Corps first started working with the CIA and then branched off on its own. It too tested drugs on unwitting victims, and a death would result.
Just try to like imagine this. You have a meeting with some people, and during or after that meeting, suddenly you start tripping balls, and you don't know why it's happening, which means that you just think you're going mad, right? You think that your biology is failing you, that it's betraying you. You don't know if you're gonna live or die. And then eventually, for LSD, 12 hours later, the experience ends. And from that point on, you just live in fear, thinking this could happen to me at any time, any day, and I have no control over it because you don't know that you were drugged with something. And especially at that time, because this drug was totally new, right? So people wouldn't have even had the inkling that this is something that could be induced pharmacologically. And yeah, of course, as Nick has said, you're being fed subliminal messages the whole time too. Yeah, exactly. So no wonder he wanted to kill himself. I can't even imagine living like that. It's just absolutely horrific to think about.
The case of this man, Harold Blower, a tennis pro, seen here with his daughter Elizabeth, is well known. In 1953, Blower was a private patient at the New York State Psychiatric Institute. He was given 5 injections of a mescaline derivative that was being tested secretly for the Army Chemical Corps. With the 5th injection, Harold Blower died. As with the Olson case, a 22-year cover-up followed, until finally the Army admitted the real details of Blower's death. Since the initial news stories of Harold Blower's death, close to 5,000 documents, previously classified, have been released by the Army and obtained by ABC News. They provide valuable insight into Army activities at the time of Blower's death and where the Army went from there with their own drug testing program. From a previously classified deposition of Dr. James Cattell, who administered the mescaline derivative, on the purpose of the drug testing, to produce symptoms similar to those that you see in schizophrenia.
Great.
On how much the patient knew about all this. We didn't delineate all the possibilities of what might happen because then you contaminate your experiment. Cattell then relates that he never even knew what drug he had given Harold Blower because of the secrecy of the Army experiments. We didn't know whether it was dog piss. This was secret. This was a secret. We weren't in on it.
Ugh.
We asked Blower's daughter Elizabeth for her reaction.
What? How can anybody react to that? I mean, it is so far from what you'd expect from a human being, never mind a doctor, never mind a professional specialist who's supposed to care about people's minds. It's unbelievable.
A suit filed by Elizabeth Barrett against the Army Chemical Corps is now pending in federal court. Other Army experiments continued on mental patients in the country. Work done at the Tulane Medical Center in New Orleans involved several drugs.
These must have been the documents that Jack found underneath in the tunnels, underneath this school.
Hallucinogenics and electrodes implanted in the brain. The chief researcher was Dr. Russell Monroe, now head of the psychiatry department at the University of Maryland. These are various progress reports written by Dr. Monroe and recently obtained by ABC News. From one of the progress reports, a report of a woman who had electrodes implanted in the brain and was then given LSD and other drugs. She became agitated, cried, lapsed into a trance-like state. Felt as if she were about to have a convulsion, experienced waves of darkness and light, and bizarre sensations in her neck and legs, said somebody was trying to manipulate her body. At this point, Dr. Monroe wrote that the woman was obviously having paranoid ideas.
What?
As a layperson,
she had electrodes in her brain. They were manipulating her body. How is that paranoid?
Therapeutic effect would the type of experiment that I just described have on a patient? Well,
the therapeutic effect would be indirect.
Was this patient
What?
given LSD?
That was his response? He didn't even try.
Yes, I mean they were told that they would be given some medications, and they
Specifically LSD?
Well, we told them, I don't think that they would have even known what LSD was then at the time. They were told that they would be given some medications which might make them feel worse.
Dr. Monroe, what do you think the Army Chemical Corps was looking for in all of this testing?
They were looking for an incapacitating agent, an agent that would not harm the person permanently, but would incapacitate them temporarily. That seemed like a humanistic way to to wage a war.
Why is he laughing? And also, if you wanted to incapacitate somebody, then you would give them a sedative. You wouldn't put electrodes in their brain and give them a psychedelic drug. He's lying out his ass right now.
When James Thornwell was given LSD by Army intelligence in 1961, this time it was no experiment. This time, the express purpose was to peel back Thornwell's brain to bear any secret within it.
Ugh.
This time, the Army had gone operational. Thornwell, as reported on ABC last January, was an Army private stationed in Orléans, France. Classified documents were missing from his unit. Thornwell became a suspect. His 2.5-month interrogation included administration of sodium pentothal, hypnosis, isolation, and deprivation of sleep.
Ugh.
Army documents obtained by ABC News refer to this interrogation as conventional.
What?
Despite the severe questioning, Army intelligence was getting nowhere with Thornwell, and it was decided to slip him LSD. For 16 years, Thornwell never knew what had hit him.
Tell me about the ass.
Yeah, torture equals conventional, Nick said in the chat. That's about right. The ick that I have right now is so strong. I didn't think that I could freaking hate this system and the quote unquote experts even more than I already do, but man. And just the realization that it's not gotten better since then. It's actually just gotten way worse, but more hidden, more low key.
Oh, rather not. It's a bad trip. Bad trip. That was a bad trip. The pain was so excruciating. Felt like somebody was sticking me with a million pins. You know, just everywhere. Oh, just. Don't talk to me. Oh, I walked over. And, I can live through it. I lived through it. Lived through it.
No charges were ever brought by the Army against Thornwell. He was discharged for psychological disorders. But an Army psychiatric evaluation of Thornwell obtained by ABC News, one which was done prior to Thornwell having been given LSD, says of him, fairly cooperative, oriented, alert, and gave no evidence of psychosis or depression. From the Army's point of view, this type of LSD interrogation was a success. Other documents refer to the exploitability of interrogation subjects, cracking them, keeping them off balance mentally, and providing an economical, speedy, and productive aid to interrogation. From James Thornwell's point of view, it was no success. Thornwell still has serious problems. He's run through 2 marriages. He maintains he can't hold a job, can't concentrate, has nightmares, and feels socially and emotionally isolated. Last fall, Thornwell filed suit against the government in federal court. In a moment, we will examine the closest experimentation to brainwashing that we have uncovered.
Great, more commercials incoming.
Oh, for loud. There's something wrong with them. You pick up a paper these days, you learn life isn't as simple as it used to be, and neither's food. Is that why you eat grape nut cereal? Yep, you couldn't ask for a simpler cereal.
My grandma ate that.
Vitamins added, no preservatives. Sure looks simple. It's got a natural nutty taste.
What's good for breakfast, guys?
How about something nice and simple? Grape nuts, simple cereal.
You're so right, there's no music.
Maxwell House
Oh!
coffee you can count.
There we go.
Maxwell House. Get to the last drop.
Good every time. Good coffee.
Maxwell House, coffee you can count on. Always smells good, always tastes good, always good to the last drop. Maxwell House, here's good to the last drop.
ABC News Close Up will continue in a moment. Special baseball. The Yankees take on the Angels Friday night on ABC.
This is a heavy-duty stick-up. It is. Oh, it's a good place for it. Heavy-duty stick-ups from Airwick for small places with big odors.
This is David Shoemaker in the news at this hour. District Police have charged a young Northeast woman with the weekend kidnapping of that day-old baby. Sources say the woman was pregnant and afraid she'd lost her own child in the accident, and that's what motivated the kidnapping. Was the night before Skylab, and we'll have the latest on its fate and ours. Testimony before Congress today on battered wives. Some of the victims are battered wives. A rock and roll star put on probation for income tax evasion. The condition is he must put on 1,000 hours of concerts for charities. And we'll be talking with a local teenager who won a gold medal at the Pan Am Games. Join us at 11.
Wait, if I evade taxes, can I just do consultations for free for a year?
Nothing else tastes or feels quite like Mountain Dew or goes down as
Dystopian much?
He's on a lazy afternoon.
By far, the most chilling experiments we have uncovered took place at this Gothic estate called Ravenscrag, halfway up Mount Royal in Montreal. It houses the Allen Memorial Institute of Psychiatry of McGill University. It was here that the CIA funded a series of experiments, severe experiments. The work was done by the Institute's then director, Dr. Ewan Cameron. It is the closest experimentation to brainwashing yet disclosed. His work, unprecedented in psychiatry, consisted of three areas which he called sleep therapy, psychic driving, and the ultimate depatterning. Dr. Maurice Dongier, current head of the Allen Memorial Institute.
In his psychic driving, so-called type of therapy, he would give the patient intensive electric treatment in order to make the patient regress deeply, become forgetful, and then he would attempt to implant new ideas in the mind of the patient.
Now, to a layman, it would appear that Dr. Cameron was trying to take the slate and wipe it clean, the slate being the mind. In other words, brainwashing.
Exactly, that's a very good comparison.
Brainwashing.
Yes. Right.
Val Orlico of Winnipeg, Canada, the wife of a member of the Canadian Parliament, was a patient of Dr. Cameron's.
Oh.
She entered the Allen Memorial Institute because of severe depression. She describes for the first time publicly the LSD therapy and psychic driving treatment that she was given by Dr. Cameron.
And then the drug began to take hold very rapidly because it was an IV injection. And things became very furry and very frightening, and had a lot of sensations that it's very difficult to recall. Nobody explained it to me. Nobody ever asked me if I was willing to do it or anything.
His feeling that he would be able to get through resistance of illness and to reach deep changes very quickly.
Yeah, right.
I don't think that when you look at that in retrospect, the hopes that he had been
have been in any way fulfilled.
He was probably just a sicko that liked hurting people.
But Cameron would plunge on. The next step was what he called psychic driving. This involved almost endless tape-recorded messages and more drugs for the patient. Cameron wrote that this was the way to make direct control changes in personality.
I thought this was the coldest and most impersonal treatment that anybody could give to anybody in the world.
Mm.
And I became more and more despondent and more angry. I just became so despondent that I thought I can't live like this any longer. And I thought I would just go out and throw myself underneath the cars on McGregor. I stood on the curb of that street and I stood there and I thought, okay, go. Okay, go. And then I thought, what if you're not killed? What if you're just maimed? What if you don't die and you live and you can't even talk anymore? And I couldn't do it.
The most severe technique Cameron used was de-patterning. He described it as breaking up the existing patterns of behavior by means of intensive electroshock therapy with prolonged periods of sleep. He carried out these experiments in something he called the sleep rooms.
People in there were like babies. They cried and they were very disoriented. And we were very afraid of the sleep room. We used to walk very carefully against the side of the corridor that was opposite the sleep room with our backs to the wall when we'd go by.
Cameron used this combined sleep electroshock treatment on patients as long as 30 days. One patient he kept asleep for 65 days. Cameron retired, and his successor, Dr. Robert Cleghorn, ordered a follow-up study on the patients treated with Cameron's de-patterning method.
It showed that it was no more beneficial in its result than the use of more conservative methods.
But the follow-up study showed that 60% of those who had been de-patterned still had amnesia for periods of anywhere from 6 months to 10 years. That's quite a memory loss, isn't it?
That is a memory loss. Indeed it is. It's I think, more than desirable.
In retrospect, does Dr. Cameron's experimentation and his treatment appear harsh?
I would say yes. This forceful type of approach that I was describing to you is definitely, it can be said that it's harsh.
I wouldn't call it harsh. I would say it was harder on the staff than it was on the patients.
Shut your mouth, dude. You go have it done then, if it's so easy.
Because these people had to be fed and they had to be cared for and they had to be given sufficient fluid and food and toileted and so on and so forth. It was a very difficult thing for the staff to
what the frick?
To follow these patients properly and see that they did well.
Did well?
Well, I'm glad he was concerned for the staff. But damn it all, I wouldn't. I could have maybe had a different kind of life.
Oh.
And that makes me angry and sad, and I don't know how to explain how I feel, really. I just
How did you feel when you learned that Dr. Cameron's experimentation was financed by the CIA?
I can't even use the word that I thought, because I thought, that bastard. And he was too smart. He knew who he was working for. And, excuse me, but I just, I just can't, sometimes I can't believe it. And yet I know it's true.
If you had the opportunity to say something to the people at the Central Intelligence Agency who financed this study, what would you say?
I realize the CIA is a very important organization and they have a very important job to do. But God, it surely doesn't have to be done on people who are totally incapable of knowing what's happening or having any defense against it. And I can't imagine the mentality of people who would do this. I just can't.
As for Dr. Cameron, he died in 1966 while mountain climbing. A colleague wrote of Cameron, "For him, the ends justified the means. And when one is dealing with a waste of human potential, it is easy to adopt this stance." Dr. Cameron seemed ideally suited for what the CIA had in mind.
America is adapting to the shape of things to come. Triumph TR7 with 5-speed transmission or optional automatic. Wide steel belted radials, front disc brakes, front end spoiler, rack and pinion steering. Triumph TR7. No other sports car looks like it. No other sports car drives like it. Triumph TR7. The shape.
Don't worry, you just got lucky. I'm sorry, I let us down. Forget it. We'll beat it next week. No.
You know, I kind of have to agree with that poor woman who was just speaking, in that you can hear about this stuff all day, and I feel like it's impossible to wrap my head around the fact that not only did this happen, but that, you know, this organization is still at large doing probably even worse things in a clandestine fashion. Like, it's impossible to actually comprehend that in some way, that this is the reality. Because, I mean, if you just go about your life and you're not educated on the history at all, you would think that this is impossible. This would never happen. It's just quite chilling to see what humans are capable of under certain conditions.
No, they let us down. Come on, how about a Michelob Light, huh? Michelob makes a light beer? Sure.
The good taste of
Though one might make the argument that maybe they're not humans, maybe they're demons. Perhaps. Who knows?
Michelob Light. Don't just compare it to other light beers. Compare it to
Or working with demons, or possessed in some way, or who knows? Who knows? I'm not gonna rule anything out at this point.
your arena beer. It's that good.
This Michelob Light is great. Hey, you know what our real problem was today? Yeah, you were terrible.
Contagions in the families.
The many roles I play call for many hairstyles. So I use hot curlers, blow dryers, things that can be brutal to hair. I switched from one conditioner to another looking for help. Then came Alberto VO5 hot oil treatment. It works just like a salon hot oil treatment, but takes less time and money. I just heat a tube, smooth it in, and shampoo. My hair is left silky, shiny, more manageable than I ever dreamed. Alberto VO5 hot oil treatment. I'll never switch again.
Thursday.
I can move a few of my things over this morning.
It's a scandal in the 12th when Wojo gets a roommate.
Hi.
In a Barney Miller special.
Prisoner of my biological urges.
Sorry to hear that. Then authorities say this Texas motorcycle gang murdered a federal judge.
People are always scared of something they don't understand, and they don't understand us, so they're scared.
Geraldo Rivera investigates dope, death, and the banditos on 2020.
Thursday, starting at 9, 8 Central and Mountain on ABC.
It was the Cold War, and especially the trial of Joseph Cardinal Manzetti, who was forced to testify in a Hungarian court that he was a spy. And then later, the Korean War, with the coerced and mainly fraudulent confessions of American servicemen.
Took place on the
That would spark intense interest in intelligence circles about brainwashing. The CIA secretly commissioned a study of communist brainwashing methods at the Cornell University Medical Center. A leader of that study was Dr. Lawrence Hinkle. He explains first the Russian method of controlling and breaking a person.
Absolutely isolated from everyone else, with one man whose job it is to get you to write the extent to which you are a criminal. In this setting, you can get people to do most anything, do you see? Because you don't have to lay a hand. And by the time you get through and you go up before the judge, the fellow says, "Were you a spy?" He says, "Yes, I was a spy." The Chinese never really had this kind of a state police system. They were getting in, and all this fellow does is ask you to write, rewrite, and talk to him about your whole life.
graduated from pilot training in 1949.
While the purpose of the study was to find out about communist brainwashing techniques,
CIA documents show that the agency was interested in developing mind control methods of its own to precondition and control Chinese living in this country to be sent back to their homeland as CIA agents. What do you think that will?
Oh, the irony, because now China's doing that to us. Oh, so ironic.
I think they weren't looking they weren't looking for agents or anything like that.
Yet the agency's perception of the work you were doing in CIA documents we have examined,
Yeah.
it says that the project that was being done here, they intended to use everything learned about the new agents to induce them to, quote, to perform acts of a complex, purposeful nature.
Yeah, but that was
the
never
effects
done.
of which may be out of keeping with the individual's
That sort of thing was never done. Those people were not. That was when they first came here. The first people they sent up to see us, you see, were operational type people from the CIA with some rather wild ideas.
Okay, this is their perception of it. If I could
No,
just continue.
their perception, Steve. No, it wasn't
Dangerous to his being, contrary
Yeah,
to
I
any previous
understand that,
consciously
but you
expressed
see,
intentions and interests,
yeah,
contrary to the good of the individual, and subversive to the goals for which he is
Yeah, I
consciously
understand
working.
all this talk. But the situation was, you see, those things were never done because of wise people on both sides. We not able to do this nor interested in it.
They were, though.
Some of the low-level people were, but the high-level people were not, to tell you the truth.
But documents clearly show that the CIA was attempting to develop agents over whom they had as much control as possible. Agents who would perform tasks contrary to their own good.
We just watched Denzel's version of the Manchurian Candidate like 2 months ago.
He can be an American and trained to kill, and then to have no memory of having killed. His brain has not only been washed, as they say, it has been dry cleaned.
Is a Manchurian candidate, controlled by others to do things against his will, possible?
It was a remarkable film because, as far as I'm concerned, it made something totally impossible seem absolutely credible.
I would say the answer is yes. There are many qualifications to that.
Dr. Milton Klein, a psychologist, a clinical and experimental hypnotist, and unpaid consultant to the CIA.
The qualifications would be the subject selected to produce the kind of behavior that you wish, the amount of time, the procedures that are utilized, and the motivations of the people who are designing, executing, and administering the procedures. You're asking whether an individual can be, under hypnosis, influenced, coerced, persuaded, shaped to perform an antisocial act, or a destructive act, or an act of violence. My answer would be yes.
Captain Marco, will you be good enough to lend Raymond your pistol, please? Yes, ma'am.
Thanks, Vic.
Sure, kid. Shoot Bobby Raymond. Through the forehead.
Oh no.
Yes, ma'am.
Ma'am?
How valuable a tool can hypnosis be in the intelligence field?
None whatsoever. It has absolutely no use because nobody's ever been able to do that I know of, do it in an operationally feasible way. I'm not in any way saying that hypnosis doesn't take place. I'm not saying there's nothing to it.
I would say that most government agencies concerned with intelligence operations have been looking to hypnosis as a tool for a variety of purposes, one of which is to carry out and to execute certain intelligence operations on a basis where they would not have to rely completely on some of their own emotional reactions. Actually,
Would that entail murder?
It could, if you consider that an act of killing someone under circumstances of war is murder. I think one has to define what that means.
Yeah, I mean, good point, Nick. So in the chat, he said Becker's research detailed in cross currents about hypnosis was fascinating. And bear in mind, too, that Becker, I mean, this is the early 70s, right? So he's actually at kind of the peak of his career. He's not canceled until I mean, the 60 Minutes interview was in 1977, but I would say things started declining like a few months to a year before that. So he was right up there, and so was Dr. Alan Fry's work. So Dr. Alan Fry was an EMF researcher as well. Both he and Becker were like rock stars in their field, but Becker was primarily interested not only on the negative effects of EMFs on biological systems and regeneration, but also how to support the regenerative pathways and currents within the body to facilitate the healing process and the regeneration process, versus Alan Fry was focused entirely on the harms aspect. And of course, Becker ended up getting canceled for whistleblowing about the harms of non-native EMFs, in particular from like the military antennas that were being used. And Alan Fry ended up having, his career continued to thrive, and he did work on Havana syndrome and um, other negative effects of EMFs on the body, like the opening up of the barriers of barrier tissues in the body, like the blood-brain barrier, the gut barrier, etc., from certain frequencies. And of course, despite, or maybe, because of that data, certain frequencies and waveforms were chosen to roll out into our future technology. Um, whether it's, you can't really say it's out of ignorance, because he was generating that data to show, hey, these frequencies are harmful in this way on biological systems, and if you pulse it, it's worse. And then what do we get? We get those frequencies in a pulsed form in all of our technology, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, 5G, 4G, LTE, etc. So you can't claim ignorance when that data was very much there at the time, way before this technology was rolled out. Um, but yeah, going back to Becker and hypnosis, I would definitely recommend people read Cross Currents. We're currently about halfway through that book in the book club, maybe a little bit less. We read The Body Electric before that, but yeah, he talks about, I mean, when you learn about the DC regeneration current that is responsible for stimulating tissues to heal and regenerate in the case of bone, that current comes from the perineural cells of the brain, and that pain is the portal to activating those. So if you feel a pain stimulus, that signal gets sent from the periphery back to the CNS, the brain and the central nervous system, which then stimulates the DC electric current to go back to the site of injury or pain to stimulate the healing process. Um, and that suggestibility, hypnosis, words of affirmation, um, the placebo effect in general, I would say, is very, very powerful with regards to also helping to stimulate the process of healing and regeneration. And it's likely through helping to stimulate that DC electric current. So it sounds woo and intangible, but it's creating a very detectable response in the biology that, whether that's being stimulated by something as intangible as like, a placebo effect or hypnosis versus an actual pain stimulus or an injury, it doesn't matter. The DC current response is the same. And so anything that can help to stimulate that regenerative current, it's going to help, the regeneration and healing process, no matter, what part of the body we're talking about. So it is very powerful.
The circumstances of peace. The circumstances of peace, it would be murder. Another former CIA agent says that Fidel Castro at one time was considered as a possible target for a Manchurian candidate.
Castro was naturally our discussion point.
Instead, they passed him a cigar laced with SV40 and gave him cancer.
Could you get somebody gung-ho enough that they would go in and get him? But if you have 100% control of a guy, you have 100% dependency. If something happens and you haven't programmed it in, you've got a problem.
So in the end, it was decided that a Manchurian candidate was not feasible,
Tried to, yes.
but the search for mind control continued. But could
Yeah, I think what's his name? Why am I spacing on his name? The Patsy. I don't know why I'm spacing on his name. Was supposed to bring the cigar to Mexico and didn't make it to the drop point. Lee Harvey Oswald, thank you.
the mind be controlled? Perhaps not. But is human behavior predictable? In this area, the CIA did make a significant breakthrough. A personality assessment system designed by the agency's chief psychologist, John Gittinger. It comes close to being able to predict how humans will behave.
It's really a descriptive system, an attempt to try to describe personality in a relatively systematic way so that hopefully you can get some kind of an idea to predict what the behavior between different kinds of individuals.
Gettinger's system had many uses in intelligence work. One was to draw personality portraits of world leaders. Using Gettinger's system, the agency concluded the Shah of Iran is a brilliant but dangerous megalomaniac whose basic problems resulted from an overbearing father. And there were other applications. Your assessment staff played a key role in helping other governments pick their police intelligence agencies, including, we've learned, the Korean CIA, Uruguayan National Police. Can you tell us about this?
No.
Author John Marks,
the former #2 CIA man in Uruguay, told me how in 1966, John Gittinger and an assistant traveled down to Uruguay and gave the tests in order to select members of the Uruguayan intelligence service. A psychologist who used to work for the CIA told me in 1961 he personally traveled to South Korea as part of an American CIA effort to set up the Korean CIA and to give the personality tests to candidates for the Korean CIA to choose the best man for their secret police.
But one of the basic functions of Gittinger's system was finding the vulnerabilities of an agent, a double agent, or a potential agent. In its applicability to intelligence work, isn't the PAS system looking for a person's soft spot?
Well, of course, the answer to that is yes, but I hasten to say soft spot. This is what I consider a negative word.
Of the hundreds of behavioral projects undertaken by the CIA, Gittinger's appears to have been one of the more successful and more conventional. Other experiments were not as conventional. Neurophysicist Dr. Jose Delgado was financed by the Office of Naval Research. In this experiment, the bull is sedated. Electrodes are implanted in its brain. Delgado transmits an electronic impulse to the center of the bull's brain. Delgado has remote control of the animal. Recently released CIA documents refer to the feasibility of remote control of animals, and that special investigations will be conducted toward the application of selected elements of these techniques to man.
What the hell?
Other areas were examined.
They're so flagrant about it. They don't even try to hide it.
Through the 60s and 70s. Brain surgery, psychosurgery, creation of amnesia, parapsychology, manipulation of genes. Even though past and present CIA officials have indicated this kind of work ended in 1963.
By the way, I think about 10 years later, or maybe a little bit less, was Project Stargate, which was the remote viewing initiative or project. Also spearheaded by the CIA, and apparently Russia was, or the Soviet Union was doing something similar at the time as well. There are a few famous people that kind of arose out of that were extremely good remote viewers. Apparently the project was scrapped ultimately and due to infeasibility or like inaccuracy or whatever, but I think probably not, because there's going to be a huge variability, right, in somebody's ability to remote view. Certainly there's some aspect of like just an innate talent aspect to it. So if you do a rigorous enough search and find the right people, you probably have a quite high accuracy, but um who knows if that's being implemented, to this day regularly, hard to say. But just for like a frame of reference for like the timeline there, because they were talking about like parapsychology and it kind of falls into that realm.
And one of those who took part in these programs. In 1977, the Senate subcommittee heard testimony from many of them.
Cough Gates program caught, exactly, yeah. Nick mentioned in the chat, which is a whole can of worms. But if you are watching this and you were in a gifted and talented program, you may be entitled to compensation.
But the testimony was not that revealing. According to one of them, they agreed amongst themselves to keep the inquiry within bounds that would satisfy the committee. Former narcotics officer Charles Siragusa says that he was asked to limit his testimony by the man he reported to at the CIA.
He wanted me not to say anything.
To perjure yourself.
That's right. Well, either that, I'd have to perjure myself or take the Fifth Amendment. And I'm not about to take the Fifth Amendment for anybody.
Okay. Former CIA chemist Robert Lashbrook testified he had no first-hand knowledge of the agency-run safe houses when in fact he supervised one of them. There was very little. And according to George White's diaries, was at a safe house when White conducted what he called an LSD surprise experiment.
Surprise!
Gottlieb, whom we recently filmed near his California home, oversaw many of the CIA behavioral programs. He retired in 1973 and destroyed the records of this work. In sort of a valedictory letter, Dr. Gottlieb wrote that he and his colleagues had been able to maintain contact with the leading edge of developments in the field of biological and chemical control of human behavior. Dr. Gottlieb also testified before the Senate subcommittee, but from an anteroom where he could not be filmed because of what his lawyer termed health and cardiac problems.
Oh, please.
Gottlieb declined ABC News' request for an interview. And what of George White, the man who helped the agency in so many of its programs? He would retire here to Stinson Beach, California. And shortly before his death, he wrote to his boss at the CIA, Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, and summed up his career by saying, "It was fun, fun, fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, and cheat, steal, deceive, rape, and pillage, with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest?"
Wow.
Has mind control been achieved? From all of the available evidence, it appears doubtful. The human will has prevailed up to this point. But as we have seen, work is continuing in this field. Work that we still don't know very much about. How deeply are the Russians and other dictatorships into all of this? We really can't say, and the CIA is reluctant to give out information about it. But the basic question remains, what place does all of this have within a democracy? One final point should be made. As one of the persons who worked on these programs told us, we are very capable, conscientious, and very dedicated scientists working for our country. Their work speaks.
So that's what they say to help themselves sleep at night?
Self. This is Paul Altmaier for ABC News. Good night.
Here's a great.
All right. That was heavy. What do I even say after that? I guess what I'll say is that, what I kind of already said, which is that all of this is still very relevant. If you think they stopped, they didn't. I think Jack talks quite a bit about in the Obama era, the Brain Health Initiative, the BHI, is what he believed to be a continuation of the MKUltra experiments, but instead being conducted in poor parts of South and Central America instead of in the US, I guess. They think, if let's say they were to get caught doing that, then it would be less egregious than doing it on Americans, which just messed up on many levels. So we're not gonna talk about it in this program just because we've already gone on for quite a bit of time. But the fun will continue. Like Nick and I mentioned in the Telegram, we're gonna start a little membership, and everybody who enrolled in this program is just gonna be automatically added to that, where we're gonna meet monthly. We still aren't sure when we're starting, maybe end of this year, maybe December, maybe early next year, January or February. So we'll let you guys know. But where we're gonna be doing monthly deep dives, probably 2 to 3 hour calls per month, where we're going to dive into specific topics, some of which we covered in this program, others that will be new, or building upon things that we've covered in this program, just so we have some more time to really double click on some of these issues, because the scope of this program in particular was very broad. We could only go so deep, and so we're hoping to kind of balance that by having the opportunity to kind of zoom in more on specific topics and time points of interest throughout the timeline of basically all of history up until this point. I mean, we're probably going to be a bit all over the place, but just kind of finding what is interesting to us and kind of riff on it as well and have some discussions and some readings and watch some videos. So it should be really fun. Did you want to say anything, Nick? I can ask you to unmute. Not necessarily about that, but just in general, wrapping up or whatever.
Yeah, I'm just grateful to have gotten to be part of this project. Thanks for having me, and
So fun.
to everybody who's tuned in, thanks for your trust in us to guide you down these rabbit holes. If you've been like intellectually curious and you've found yourself investigating conspiracy theories, um, it could be a deep and dark endeavor to take on by yourself, trying to make sense of things and figure out how some of these things are possible. And hopefully you got a taste in this course that the truth is much more complicated than a lot of what you read online tries to make things sound so simple. But this was enlightening, and I'm excited to continue on. I mean, even just in like our chat today, I feel like we kind of alluded to so many other things that we didn't even get the chance to cover in the course. And I know throughout the weeks, like putting together the slides, there's just like entire topics that we just had to scrap to try to stay to, a somewhat narrow uh series of events. So I'm excited to keep going. And yeah, I guess the only thing I would leave you with is if there are any sorry, there are gardeners
No
directly
worries.
outside my window. I don't know
Can't
if you
hear
guys.
it at all.
Okay, great. It's just me then. If there are any like specific topics that maybe you guys would be interested in, feel free to share them with us. So I'll leave you with that.
Yeah, yeah, feel free to continue using the Telegram. Maybe we'll just end up merging that with the future group. We'll see. It might make more sense to start a new one. I don't know. We'll think about it. But yeah, feel free to drop resources, or thoughts in the Telegram if there's anything you come across or you have questions or comments or ideas. It's definitely a good place to share so we can kind of brainstorm together and keep the fun kind of rolling. So thanks everybody for joining us. It's kind of crazy. I feel like these past few months feel both long and short at the same time. It's kind of weird. We've been through a lot together. We covered a ton, and we'll keep the good times rolling. Again, we'll start them up pretty soon. And so thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Nick, so much for supporting and helping with the program. I feel like it's gonna kind of suck to do any programs alone after doing this. It makes it so much more fun to do it with somebody. So it's been much appreciated, and we'll catch all y'all in the next program. So stay tuned for that. Bye.